American women today have less rights than their predecessors. They have lost the freedom of choice about their reproductive options. Since early voting has begun, women have clearly outpaced men by at least 10 points. This has led to some GOP politicians to call for a repeal of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Furthermore, J.D. Vance has said that women in abusive relationships should not be allowed to get divorced. Many states have passed personhood laws, also known as heartbeat bills. That means a fetus becomes a person as soon as a heartbeat can be detected. Moreover, many GOP politicians believe that life begins at fertilization, which subsequently gave us the Alabama IVF ban. Many anti-abortion activists and their political supporters have referenced using the 1873 Comstock Act to ban all forms of contraception, including mifepristone, which is a drug used to perform most abortions. This is a slippery slope, and the U.S. Supreme Court has been kicking the can down the road until after the election when, more likely than not, they will rule to ban those drugs. Overturning Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision has led to dire consequences for women and the men who love them. 1/3 of states in America have total abortion bans. Some women who are pro-Dobbs have admitted to recently having abortions, but still believe it should be banned for others. They are privileged enough to fly around the country, outside the country, or have their private doctors terminate unwanted pregnancies. Yet, on the other hand, women who live in poverty are not so lucky. Forcing victims of rape and incest to have their rapist babies have life-changing traumatic effects. Kids who grow up in unhealthy environments have a difficult time being successful. Many of them who become victims of abuse, neglect, and grow up without love go on to be a detriment to society. They often need financial assistance from the government, get put into foster care, or worse, become juvenile delinquent runaways who get into drugs, crime, and prostitution. That means we all pay for forcing women to have these unwanted pregnancies. Many of these consequences were easily predictable and politicians were forewarned, but yet they persisted and want to go even further if given the power. This American horror story is a Handmaid's Tale come to life.
So to the men who love us, let me just try to paint a picture of what it will feel like if America, the wealthiest nation on earth, keeps revoking basic care from its women, and how it will affect every single woman in your life. Your girlfriend could be the one in legal jeopardy if she needs a pill from out of state or overseas, or if she has to travel across state lines because the local clinic closed up. Your wife or mother could be the ones at higher risk of dying from undiagnosed cervical cancer because they have no access to regular gynecological care. Your daughter could be the one too terrified to call the doctor if she's bleeding during an unexpected pregnancy. Your niece could be the one miscarrying in her bathtub after the hospital turned her away. And this will not just affect women, it will affect you and your sons. The devastating consequences of teen pregnancy won't just be borne by young girls, but also by the young men who are the fathers. They too will have their dreams of going to college. Their entire future is totally upended by an unwanted pregnancy. If you and your partner are expecting a child, you will be right by her side at the checkups, terrified if her blood pressure is too high, or if there's an issue with the placenta, or if the ultrasound shows that the embryo was implanted in the wrong place, and the doctors aren't sure that they can intervene to keep the woman you love safe. If your wife is shivering and bleeding on the operating room table during a routine delivery gone bad, her pressure dropping as she loses more and more blood, or some unforeseen infection spreads and her doctors aren't sure if they can act, you will be the one praying that it's not too late. You will be the one pleading for somebody, anybody, to do something. And then there is the tragic but very real possibility that in the worst case scenario, you just might be the one holding flowers at the funeral. You might be the one left to raise your children alone. See, these are just some of the ways women die during childbirth. And I don't want to be a downer, y'all. But in many cases, there is no warning, and things go bad very quickly. And when it happens, every second of hesitation or delay can lead to devastating outcomes.
A Georgia woman has been identified as one of the first known deaths related to a lack of abortion care access.
Yeah, that's according to her family and state documentation obtained by nonprofit newsroom ProPublica. 11 Live investigator Savannah Levin's joining us in studio after reaching out to the family herself here. Savannah, what did you learn?
Well, so I know Amber Thurman died waiting 18 hours for a DNC. That's a surgical procedure sometimes used in abortions. The report finding her death likely could have been prevented.
It was jarring, shocking, and disheartening that my Georgia doctors could not provide me with the standard of care.
Georgia women and medical providers testified before Senator John Ossoff's Human Rights Subcommittee Monday in opposition to Georgia's law banning abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. Medical experts say that's typically around 6 weeks. At the same time as that testimony unfolded, nonprofit newsroom ProPublica released a report on internal documents it obtained from the Georgia committee tasked with reviewing pregnancy-related deaths. The report indicated the committee, run by the State Department of Health, determined the death of 28-year-old Amber Thurman was likely preventable if she'd had access to abortion care in her home state of Georgia. The report states Amber was going on 8 weeks pregnant at the time. Her family sharing with 11 Alive that she drove to North Carolina to obtain FDA-approved medication to terminate the pregnancy, saying by the time she arrived back to Georgia, she'd started bleeding heavily. According to medical records cited by ProPublica, Amber was rushed to a hospital in Metro Atlanta, where doctors noted twice that a DNC procedure should be considered to remove the infection. But the procedure, often used for abortions, wasn't done, not even when Amber became septic.
She was clearly septic, and she was hemorrhaging. She should have had a DNC right then and there.
Dr. Lillian Shapiro with Ideal Gynecology in Atlanta wasn't a part of Amber's care team, but says the state's so-called heartbeat law has caused confusion for medical providers who might not know when they're legally able to intervene.
My heart goes out to them because they knew the answer. They knew the answer, but they have had fear put into them by the court system, by these new laws that they don't understand.
The Magic report is sparking more controversy over Texas's near total ban on abortion. Reporters with ProPublica told the story of 28-year-old Houston mother Jolisa Barnica, who died of a deadly infection she contracted after she had a miscarriage at 17 weeks and was denied emergency care in the hospital. Joining me now is Kavita Serrano with ProPublica to talk a little bit about this story. Let's first talk to us about what exactly happened here.
Thanks for having me. Yes, Barnica was about 17 weeks pregnant when she went to the hospital, bleeding and cramping. Doctors diagnosed her with an inevitable miscarriage. Her cervix was open, the fetus was already on the verge of coming out, so there really was no chance of saving the pregnancy. The standard of care at that point, we've talked to dozens of maternal health experts and doctors across the country. They said it's to offer to speed up the delivery or a surgery to empty the uterus. And the reason for that is that there's a high risk of developing a life-threatening infection. Barnica's husband says that she was told that it would be a crime for doctors to intervene and do that because her fetus still had a fetal heartbeat. And Texas's first abortion law, the 6-week ban, had just gone into effect a few days earlier, and it told doctors they had to record that there was no fetal heartbeat before intervening. So she stayed at that hospital 40 hours before delivering, and 3 days later, she died of sepsis. We reviewed the details of this case with those experts across the country, and they said that her death looked preventable. They said that waiting so long could have allowed bacteria to enter, an infection to take hold, and that's why it's so important for patients to have abortion as an option in those kind of situations.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that really stands out is that this happened in 2021. Here we are in 2024. How did you guys learn of this to bring it to light?
That's right, and I think that's an indicator that there's many other cases that haven't been uncovered. there's nobody that is systematically looking into these cases and the effects of these abortion bans in an urgent way. Texas has a state maternal mortality review committee. Every state does. They examine deaths of pregnant people, but they haven't even reached to the end of 2021, and their cases aren't public anyway. So as reporters, we're interested in looking into the effects of bans on maternal health that doctors have warned about. So we went looking through autopsy records that we gather from medical examiners. Then we reached out to families to interview them and learn more, gather their medical records, and then take those records to experts, people who have served on those kind of maternal mortality committees, people who deal with these kinds of cases every day, and review it with them. And, it's especially stands out to hear doctors who say, if we were in Massachusetts or Ohio where there's not a law like this, she would have been delivered within a few hours.
Yeah, and we want to point out, you mentioned her husband. She also had a young child as well that she left behind. What are lawmakers saying about this? Because this is the type of thing that we really heard Democrats warning could happen and would happen before these laws were passed.
We haven't received a response. We've reached out to some of Texas's leaders who celebrated the end of Roe versus Wade, and Governor Greg Abbott, who had said that the Texas ban is protecting every heartbeat. We reached out to Senator Ted Cruz, Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's threatened to prosecute doctors if they get the ban wrong. And none of them have responded. So we will continue reaching out, looking for clarity, and we're going to continue reporting on these cases. There's more cases that we're looking into in Texas.
Tudor Dixon on the issue of abortion told a local news station in Detroit last week on why she opposes the idea of allowing teenage rape victims to receive abortions.
I've talked to some other legislators about this, and they've met the same people that I've met who've told their story of once this child knew they were in their second or third trimester. And I'm that child, that I've talked to those people who were the child of a rape victim, and the bond that those two people made, and the fact that out of that tragedy, there was healing through that baby. It's something that we don't think about, because we assume that story is someone who was taken from the front yard, then returned. That's generally not the story there. And those voices, the babies of rape victims that have come forward, are very powerful when you hear their story and what the truth is behind that. It's very hard to not stand up for those people.
Claire, you didn't hear that incorrectly. Tudor Dixon, the Republican nominee to be the next governor of Michigan, just said there is healing for a 14-year-old. That was the question. What about a 14-year-old rape victim? Tudor Dixon says that 14-year-old should deliver the baby because there is healing in that baby, healing from the rape that she experienced.
Chal does the incredibly valuable work of counseling some of these victims, people who report their rapes, people who do not report their rapes. I want to get your take on this.
Well, I don't discount what Bill has researched. I do believe 5,000 to 2,000 sounds about the right number. And if you take the aggregate at the national average, then you're looking at 25,000, 26,000, which is consistent with the 2015 longitudinal study when it comes to rape-related pregnancies. And I wrote an op-ed a few years ago on rape-related pregnancies and the consistency. So those numbers do add up. The numbers that we see right now, probably a little questionable, and I do think that if you're looking at a movement to institute some abortion rights for rape and incest exceptions, then you are discrediting. That said, those who have endured rape-related pregnancies endure a lot. And I can tell you, in counseling the clients we serve, it is an incredibly painful, emotional process to be raped by a loved one, a husband, a family member, and then to have to bring a child to full term. If Texans support rape-related exceptions, I don't see why we wouldn't have that exception. And that the fact that the legislature has absolutely ignored that, that's where the vitriol should go.
Tamara, you've advocated for young women.
Absolutely. Recently, this week, someone told me that they got a text from a friend who was raped by someone they knew well. And they said that they don't know what they're going to do and they don't know if they're going to make it because they are pregnant and they don't have the resources to leave. And they literally told them, quote, it may be better if I just kill myself. This person ain't even 30. Now, if this is what Texas wanted, y'all got it. But I don't believe this is what you intended. Because the thing about it is when you force this to happen, you're not only putting the mother, but this child, who wants a mother to have a baby that they hate? We on this show talk about the horrific child abuse stories almost weekly. They are just unbelievable what parents do to kids. Why would you set this scenario up when it could have been stopped before that?
Minnesota Senator Tina Smith is leading the effort at the U.S. Capitol to repeal an 1873 law known as the Comstock Act. Lawyers trying to ban medical abortion drugs from being sent by mail cited that federal law in arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court last week. The Comstock Act was meant to ban mailing obscene and lewd items, but it hasn't been enforced in a century. The Texas judge who ruled the abortion drug mifepristone can't be sent through the mail also pointed to that law, and Smith says she expects a potential future Trump administration to see it the same way.
The underlying challenge of having this old, antiquated law sitting out there that we know other radical anti-choice extremists are going to try to use as a tool, even though they shouldn't, means that it's going to continue to be a threat that we have to deal with.
When the U.S. District Judge, the federal judge, Matthew Kacsmaryk, ruled Friday in Texas that the Food and Drug Administration's 23-year-old approval of the leading abortion drug mifepristone violates the law, he cited the 1873 Comstock Act. The so-called anti-vice law prohibits the mailing or distribution of, quote, obscene materials and has been dormant for half a century. After the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and the 50-year-old federal right to abortion in its Dobbs decision last year, the Justice Department issued a memorandum that said the Comstock Act does not prohibit the mailing of such drugs as mifepristone. But in his ruling, the Trump-appointed anti-abortion judge, Kacsmaryk, agrees with plaintiffs in the case that the law does in fact prohibit mailing the drug. For more, we're joined by Lauren McIver Thompson, historian of birth control, specialist in specifically the Comstock Act. Lauren McIver Thompson, if you can explain what this ruling is he invoked from the 19th century, 1870, what was it, 1873.
Yeah. 1873, you're right. So, yeah, this, as a historian, when I read the opinion on Friday afternoon, I was just kind of gobsmacked, although I guess we shouldn't be surprised, as Jessica and Alexis already pointed out. The Comstock Act of 1873 was the product of a vice reformer, Anthony Comstock, who lobbied Congress in 1873, and the law was passed in March of 1873. So we're looking at 150 years now, just last month. And the law essentially criminalized anything having to do with sex at the federal level, and that included instruments that could be used for the prevention of conception or to procure abortion. And so for the judge to raise the Comstock law from the dead, essentially, as a viable legal strategy in order to achieve a ban on medication abortion, as a historian, I just really saw us kind of coming full circle and not in a good way.
I was just going to say, Michelle Goldberg writes in the New York Times, the Comstock Act, the notorious anti-obscenity law used to indict the Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger, ban books by D.H. Lawrence, and arrest people by the thousands, turning 150 last month.
Yes, this was a law with teeth. There were steep fines for violating the Comstock Act. Certainly, you could be sentenced to hard labor, you could be sentenced to years in prison, and this really ensnared ordinary Americans in this kind of vast anti-obscenity legal regime. And it's one of those things where, when you look at it as a whole, it it was, absolutely a violation of the Constitution. And it wasn't until the 1920s that there were cases that began to kind of chip away, First Amendment cases that began to chip away at the Comstock Act. But really, it was one of those laws that at the federal level that just kind of increased and expanded an already existing anti-abortion legal regime, because there had been state laws existing for 30 or 40 years before that, before the Comstock Act was passed.
We always talk about resistance, and in 2019, you wrote a piece in the Times, "Women have always had abortions." You talk about the 17th and 18th centuries, abortion legal under common law before quickening, or when the pregnant woman could feel the fetus move, beginning around 16 weeks. You write later, beginning in the 1850s, however, the crusade against abortion began in earnest. This fascinating history, relay it.
Yeah, so there's actually no laws about abortion at all until the beginning in the 1830s and 1840s. But in the 1850s, particularly with the sort of spearheading of the American Medical Association, physicians in this country began to work with legislators, white physicians, white legislators began to work together to criminalize abortion essentially by 1900 in every state in the Union. And so what you had was a statewide network of anti-abortion and anti-contraception laws. And then layered on top of that, by 1873, you have the Comstock Act. So somebody seeking to abort a pregnancy or to prevent conception. And by the way, there were, reproductive control items were everywhere in America in the 19th century. You could order barrier methods from any kind of mail order catalog or obtain them at the pharmacy. Women were managing their fertility at home with these things. But to do so was risking a legal arrest. I mean, it was a dangerous prospect to do so because of the legal regime that gets put into place at both the federal and the state levels.
And finally, Kaczmarek's language, not only talking, of course, about the Comstock Act, but referring to fetuses as unborn humans.
Yes. So what's really kind of interesting about that, if interesting is the word, is that the anti-abortion movement's emphasis on fetal personhood these days, that's been around since the 1960s. It's kind of decades old. But originally, the passage of abortion laws and the Comstock Act were really not focused on the idea that the fetus was a person. These laws were rooted in anti-immigrant sentiment, eugenics sentiment, the idea that not enough white middle-class women were having babies because they were the ones seeking contraception and abortion. And so physicians, although they kind of paid lip service to the idea that abortion was murder, they were really kind of, if you look at it in terms of a pie, that was just kind of one piece of the pie. The other pieces of the pie included misogyny, racism, and eugenic sentiment. So for this kind of invocation of the fetus as a person, that's something that is different than it was in the 19th century. And I think what the Comstock Act reviving that might achieve is it's going to essentially, if this kind of decision goes through and carries forward, we're going to end up seeing a sort of nationwide ban on abortion through the Comstock Act, rather than trying to convince the rest of America that fetal personhood and the 14th Amendment and the rights of a fetus, should ban abortion nationwide. So they may not have to go down that path if they can ban abortion nationwide through the Comstock Act.
So, when we hear things about the male, right? Because Comstock is all about the male. And so I think in this modern context, most of us immediately think, oh yeah, abortion pills by mail. Comstock could ban that, right? But what's really scary about Comstock is that if you think about it, actually everything that's in a doctor's office or a clinic when you go there was shipped at some point.
Right.
So Comstock could lay the groundwork for a total abortion ban nationally, because if we get some kind of a ruling that says, abortion is unlawful, well, then it's not just medication, but it's every piece of equipment, every device that would be in a clinic that could be prevented from being sent in the mail. And this could also ban contraception, healthcare for LGBTQ people, really just to name a couple of the very scary implications of this.